Hey there, and welcome to the Recovery Crew podcast. I'm Dr. Bob Baer, and we're glad you're here today. Our guest is Bryant Packard. He's an executive coach and therapist, and we're going to talk about parenting and leadership and spirituality. We're going to get it all answered here today. The answer to all of those very simple concepts. But we're glad you're here, and you can watch this on our YouTube channel, and we're on all of the podcast platforms, and we're also on all the social media platforms. Please like us, share, especially subscribe to this podcast. So you're in the deep waters, and we're glad you're with us. Okay, so there's Bryant Packard. Welcome, brother.
Hey there, Dr. Bob.
Hey there. So, we started this podcast and launched, and then there's a lightning storm out here that sort of shut us down. So we're doing this little shorter redoing of the intro in case I can't recapture that. And that's fine. So here's Bryant Packard, my old buddy. We've been through a lot together. He's come a long way and is in that transition place in his life. He was an executive and had a long career in communications management with Fortune 100 tech, oil, and gas companies. He used to tell me what that was all about, but I could never quite understand it. And I don't think I have the brain cells available tonight to try to understand it tonight. But actually, he has launched into a career as a coach in leadership development. And he's been a leader in healing work for many years with the Mankind Project. And he's one of my senior facilitators at the Braveheart Experience, which we do once a month out at the Last Resort Treatment Center here in Central Texas. So glad you're here. Why don't you just do a short recap of your story, Bryant, in case we lost that other recording.
Sure. So, and actually, as you're aware, I took a sabbatical for about 3 years. I'm wrapping up graduate school. Nothing like trying to work full time and do grad school. So I'll be finishing that up at the end of July. And so then I'll be a therapist, not just doing the coaching. But you're right. One of the areas that I do focus on is ADHD and autism. Both. I grew up with ADHD, for instance, and I had dyslexia. And actually, my youngest son is on the autistic spectrum as well. Luckily for me, I had both my parents were college educated. My dad worked at University of Houston, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. Why was this super hyperactive kid, was relatively smart, non-functional, yeah. To a large part, right? And I can tell you that, and so they got me tested and all that. And luckily, one of the people, suggested I get into sports, and actually, so I started doing swim team and stuff, and that actually made a big difference. But one of the things, we talked about Brene Brown earlier, and one of the things that really stood out with me in her work is that definition of the difference between embarrassment, guilt, and shame.
Yeah. And
how a lot of people with ADHD and other types of issues really start to live in that world of shame, right? And when I got into recovery in 1995, that was one of the things I also started to notice, right? Was that shame seemed to be such a big part of my issues with recovery, and I had a feeling it probably did for others as well. And but yeah, one of the things I noticed right off the bat when I got into recovery, the very first meeting is I realized I had a problem, and it was reading.
Yeah,
it was reading books for pleasure. I mean, it was as bad as my other addictions. I mean, it really was. But the thing that really stood out for me within the first couple of meetings was I realized how much I struggled with relationships. And that has been true through all of the various recovery programs I've worked over the years as well. And it's also been true of the other programs I did. So, we keep crossing paths, for instance. Warrior and Mankind Project was another one where we crossed paths. And I realized so much of my struggles were those connection, struggles.
Yeah.
And I heard somebody once say that, getting into something like that, getting into the program like that really does supercharge your recovery as well. And I certainly found that to be true. And it's no surprise that Braveheart, grew out of multiple influences as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of travel, a lot of world travel with a technology company, and worked overseas. Although I was mostly in the States, but it was definitely an interesting time of my life. 3 boys, two of them got into recovery. One is still in recovery, and in fact helped start an APG in Austin, Texas, several years ago. Yep, several years ago.
APG, why don't you say what that is?
So, don't ask me to define it for you, but it's peer counseling. So they actually work with teens in high school and young adults in recovery and trying to stay sober and give them a very well-rounded way to socialize in sober ways. Have meetings. They arrange, like sober prom, for instance, is a big one for them. So, I've stayed in that work, whether it was my kids in recovery or myself or even my ex-wife. It's been a big part of my life. And so eventually I transitioned as I got older, and, corporate America doesn't like old people.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's definitely some ages.
They just don't understand us, Brian.
They really don't. They get rid of the people that actually know what they're doing. Yeah. But I'd been for 20 years. I'd already thought about becoming a therapist, and then looking at the 20 years of experience in the work and recovery and other peer counseling and other things that we were doing, I finally bit the bullet, because it's a 5-year process, as you well know.
Yeah.
3 years of school, 2 years of internship, and I'm almost there.
It's been half of my adult life I've been in school. I'm all out of degrees. I can't get any more. Every time my life goes to shit, I go back to school, and I'm done. So my life can't go to shit anymore. That's the case. So thanks for a little bit of a check-in. I'd prompt you about, tell me a little bit about how you bring recovery into your coaching practice. So why don't you just kind of wrap that question up if you can.
Okay. I'm trying to decide not how much to retread there. Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed early on when I got into meetings and recovery was that there were, and this is oversimplified, but there were 2 kinds of people in my young brain. There were people that were there staying sober, and then there were people that are going, what the hell? Why am I here? How do I change this? How do I fix this? Because I don't want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And that same embracing, what are the things that are in my way? What are the things that are challenging me? How do I deal with my character defects of character, for instance, right? How do I clean up the messes that I have made in my life? Step 4. How do I make amends? How do I make living amends and change? Many of those things are applicable to people that you're coaching in, whether it's corporate America, whether it's life coaching, or even ADHD and autism, because a lot of these people are dealing with the same results that we get from living a life of shame.
Yeah.
Living a life of guilt.
Yeah. Do you agree that you're also a student of Carl Jung, as I am, as all of us are that are in recovery? A lot of folks don't know that they're studying Jung just by virtue of being in recovery. But you can't take Jung's language and try to have a regular conversation with people. You can't take the language of recovery and just have, we're not a glum lot, or what are some of the other, there's some of it that's so kind of weird sounding that, to the real, we have to find ways to take this work and not be this cult of cliches, because we know it's so much deeper than that. So I know that you found some ways to be able to talk about this stuff and not sound like a recovery robot, right?
Sure. A big part of it is figuring out where people's association is, right? What matters to them? What makes me tick, right? We talked about the fun house mirror, room. Walking into the fun house, you walk in the room full of mirrors, right?
Yeah.
The mirror reflects back to me all those things I hide, repress, or deny, right? So learning to say, okay, what is it you're trying to teach me? What is it you're trying to show me?
Yeah.
And that can be any number of things. For let's say if it's a person who is pursuing a career transition, they got promoted and they're trying to become a better manager. The things that got me here may not be what let me continue my life in a good way. How like recovery is that? The things that got me into recovery definitely are not going to get me sober, right?
And one of the things as healers and coaches, nobody's been very successful helping me change without owning some of their own stuff, right? It's a little bit like if you watch Brene Brown in her videos, and I've met her a couple of times. She has this way of owning her own shit, and then you can listen. Then I'm willing to listen. It's the same thing with sponsorship and recovery. But, I first have to say my story. I'm a mess too, brother. We have to have this, as opposed to this clinician that has all of the answers that may well be able to fix all of your shit, which is the clinical model. I'm sorry to, I'm a clinician. We're both clinicians, but that model, I think, might be wearing itself out. I think the piece that vulnerability is a healing tool wherever you are, and I have to be able to come to someone with a certain amount of humility, I suppose, or the fact that we all have things that we can't see, right? Yeah. And one of the things, just to bounce off of what you said about the House of Mirrors, right? This is a Jung quote. He said, "Anything that's unresolved in us will show up outside of us, and we will call it fate." In other words, we think it's the world doing shit to us, but actually it's our unresolved stuff that's setting up these patterns over and over. And if a good coach, like I know you are, can create an environment where it becomes safe enough to say, now, wait a minute, maybe I've got a part in this. Which, most hard-driving corporate executives, in my experience, do not slow down long enough to scratch their beard and say, maybe I've got some work to do. Yeah?
Yeah, that doesn't happen near enough. One of the things that I like a lot that cracks me up, because it's just so true of myself, which is, that pie chart, right? That pie chart that's only got a sliver about yay big. It's like, these are the things that I know, and that's maybe what, 5%? And these are the things that I don't know, right? And then the whole rest of that chart is all the shit I don't know that I don't know. That my unintentional blinders keep me from recognizing about myself. What I can say is, it doesn't matter what program I'm in, what work I'm doing today. The truth is that if I don't willingly step into it, I'm going to continue to make the same mistakes. I'm going to continue to fall in.
All right, I got another prompt for you. You ready? Here's one you're going to either hate or like. Parenting, right? For me, it is the ultimate leadership role. It is the most advanced leadership role. It's the leadership role with the most impact on the world. That's a stretch, because if we are a particular kind of parent, we're going to leave a kid with less trauma to have to unpack and get out of the way of their natural, authentic expression of themselves in the world, right? And we all have a leadership that's in us to bring something beautiful into the world and bring some people along with us, right? But if they have a lot of trauma, they're going to have to unpack that first in order to find that path. So why don't you just poke around a little bit at the parenting topic?
What a beautiful and hard topic. I mean, there's just no way around it. All I can say is this, that we're going to give our kids trauma. There's no way around it, right? For me, divorce was one of those areas of trauma that I gave my kids. Other areas are dealing with a father who has ADHD. I have horrible follow-up, in some areas. I got frustrated very, very easily, right? So, how is that going to affect them? But what I can do, and what this work continues to teach me, is I can clean it up as soon as I recognize it. I can take care of it. I can surround my kids with people who are authentic, who are willing to go deep, have deep conversations that I can show that I trust, and I will bleed for, that I will take a bullet for, that I have seen their blood, sweat, and tears. And these are the people that I choose to be around, and they get to see that, they get to experience that, they get to have those conversations. At the end of the day, what I teach them that is I think probably the most effective is to go inside, figure out who you are, what do you value, what is it important to you, speak your truth.
And so, and I know you, and I know that the reason I asked you is because I think you agree with me. I only want to talk to people that agree with me. I'm going to unfriend everyone else. Of course, the real world, I don't have that unfriend button.
No.
But there is and the way that we teach, right, is by being that way. But, I don't know how you were as a teenager, but I did not do one thing my dad suggested. But certainly not my mom, neither one. It's in fact, I went the other way. There was I'm not sure that the military wouldn't have been a great thing for me, but my dad mentioned it one time and that was it. It was off the list. But I'll tell you what, there was some really healthy things about my dad and my mom that I integrated by watching. I might not have gotten it in my body fully until later with some reflection, but they modeled a lot of healthy stuff, and they modeled a lot of unhealthy stuff as well. But, for me as a dad, I have, I'm writing a book right now called Stop Doing Shit You Don't Want to Do, How Unresolved Trauma runs the show. And so, I have some experience with living my life according to what I think I'm supposed to do, and then unloading some of the trauma, and then really being able to follow the path of what comes to what I'm moved toward. Right? It's really hard to do that when you've got a bunch of negative messages and skewed messages, right? So for my daughter, one of my major skewing topics was, my mom kind of bailed me out of everything, so I never, for her own benefit, because it was uncomfortable for me to be in distress, apparently. So I never had many consequences, which is a very, very fertile ground for a budding addict. So I think one of the, I've done before my beautiful daughter, who just turned 18, came on the scene. I had already done enough work to know that I didn't want to do that. And I have this parenting rule that I think I've followed it pretty well. And that is, I had a friend who sent me a text yesterday and told me this long thing about his son that was acting out and how do I punish him? And he said, how do you do it? How do you discipline your daughter? I said, I don't. He said, what? He was like incensed. What do you mean? What's the discipline structure? Well, I let her have her consequences. And I took her phone away for 3 days one time, and she said, man, that was a great relief. So it was like, I've never done much of that stuff, and I've never given her a bunch of stuff if she does something good either. I had a mentor one time that didn't tell me a whole bunch of great shit about myself and never criticized me, neither one. And I said, why don't I get that feedback from you? She said, well, if I tell you you're great, I got to tell you you're bad. And I'm really just here to hold space for you to grow. And whether I've done that perfectly with my daughter or not, I have no idea, but she's turned out pretty good so far, pretty self-sufficient. But I'm exploring this idea of letting them have their consequences and being a loving person there. If, it doesn't go just right, but not necessarily fixing it. What do you think about all that?
Yeah. Well, the one that stood out for me is, giving them the space to grow. So one of the things I did with all three of my boys is actually did the Boys to Men program with them. And that touches on what we were talking about earlier, which is that, I needed to clean up my stuff so that I didn't pass it on to them. And there's some of it I'm going to pass on, right? But I agree with you. And in fact, my ex-wife was much better at letting them have their natural consequences. Now, obviously, when I busted them at 14 years old, and my oldest ones are twins. So I actually they're 23 years old now, but at the time they were 14, and I busted them. And the truth is I had to start taking myself back to newcomers meetings, just just to put myself in their shoes, right? I had to reconnect with that part of myself that didn't already have 10 plus years, 15 years in recovery. Because I didn't know what to do. I was at a loss. And so it's that fine line between, how do I kind of force compliance and punish, or create a way for it to become a way out for them, which is ultimately what it was.
Yeah.
Palmer drug abuse program in that case. And so I kind of had to find that balance, right, between, just encouraging their self-sufficiency versus, by God, wanting to keep them safe, right? And that looked like, I said, I will take you for the first 3 meetings. I said, and then it's up to you whether you're going to continue. Because I couldn't keep forcing it, but I had to at least take them enough to get a flavor for it.
Yep.
And then I had to do my work too.
Yep, that's the ongoing paradox of parenting. And I'm not criticizing my mom for bailing me out. She did fine. She did fine. I've learned a lot from her choosing to do that. And
absolutely.
I'm probably doing it completely wrong with Angie. Maybe I have overcorrected. Maybe I should have gotten in there and given her a little more guidance. I don't know. But okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you and I are in the same boat in that, right? My parents ended up bailing me out a lot. I mean, with the dyslexia, for instance, I could not spell my way out of a paper bag. I had a vocabulary that was, 3-4 grades higher than it should have been, but I couldn't spell to save my life. I mean, to this day, I still, I turn in papers and it's like, yeah, spell correct didn't catch it, and I sure didn't. But yeah, they had to save me a lot, and that was difficult. In fact, we for a while they were calling my dad our Jewish mother.
Yeah.
I know that's a bit insensitive.
That might be a good little segue to sports and learning disorders. Sports and how has that been an important piece? I don't know much about all that. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit about how you use that in your
Sure. One of the things I find that, and there's a lot of consistency. So I'm wrapping up a licensed marriage and family therapy graduate school, and I'm doing my internship at the VA. One of the things that as I more and more spend time in whether it's anxiety or depression or many other issues, one of the things we find is that if you had one magic bullet, the thing that stands out the most, that people benefit from the most, and this is true of recovery as well, is exercise. Getting out and moving your body. And EMDR even touches on that a little bit. So let me back that up a little bit. So, I was lucky. Both my parents had a college education. My dad was at U of H, and he started talking to people. He's like, I've got this son. Here's the problems. And so he got me tested. And, they said, yeah, your son has ADHD. And they tried the stimulant medications, which I still, to some degree use very sparingly. But one of the things that I guess they picked up on is how good for the body that especially aerobic exercise is for somebody with ADD and ADHD. There's something about, burning out, getting that exercise, getting the heart rate running and everything else. So one of the things you find is that ADHD, along with a lot of other things like recovery and depression, have a low dopamine production, right? So cool thing is guess what endorphins mimic? They mimic dopamine.
Right.
So, one of the things that I noticed right off the bat, and I continued when I got into college, I played rugby and was doing rugby, and then I even got into some aerobics just to kind of round days out. Sophomore year, I guess, or junior year, I started doing triathlons. What I found was that when I exercised at such a high level, I no longer needed those medications, right? And since then, I've done a lot of research as part of grad school, but just on my own in the meantime. And what they found is that that's very true for a lot of things, because instead of your mood swings being up and down like this, it's much more level, much more shallow, much more even. So rather than doing medications, this seems to help quite a bit.
Yeah.
It tends to help with autism. It tends to help with, it's not a magic bullet per se. It doesn't fix everything, but it helps make it more manageable.
Yeah,
that's certainly been true for me.
It's got to be part of the program for most folks. there's a thing when we talk about the food addiction thing. Some folks that have that issue have there's two sides to that thing. A lot of folks have used exercise to try to fix that disease, right? So they're running 3 marathons a week or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So there's an exaggerated version. You can get high from run. I've been a runner.
Oh, absolutely.
You can get high from running and overdo that. You can overdo any of this, but it is
absolutely
exercise and mindfulness. The combination of those two things have to be part of any recovery program. They have to be part of anybody. If anybody's serious about growth, personal growth, we have to find a way to keep the blood flowing in a good way, and also to find a place to find stillness, find a way to find stillness in the body. That's an important part of that's kind of the fourth dimension that we focus on at Deep Waters Recovery. Yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you. That actually turned out to be a good segue unintentionally. I got really lucky. One of my early sponsors was mountain biker. So guess what we did half the time? Instead of doing step work, we mountain biked and then we did step work.
Yeah.
Or I fell off and we had to do bruise work, but that's another story.
It's a great combination. It's important. We partner at Deep Waters with an outfit here in Austin that I don't think you know these guys, but I want to connect you with them. I think you guys can support each other, and that's Austin, it's Active Recovery Coaching. That's Charlie McGarty's program, and Lance Risher, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. I think you guys need to connect, but we'll talk about that offline.
So let me finish one piece. So, my backyard was Walnut Creek Park for many years. And so I would either mountain bike it or run it. And I had my trail shoes on. One of the things I did, and which you can appreciate, is I found a quasi circle of stones, just small stones. It was only, a foot or two across. I finished that out in the directions, north, west, south, east. And I would time my run so that I was about 30 minutes into a run, for instance. And I would pause there. You're talking about mindfulness, right? And I would pause there and I would, littered with rocks anyway, right? And I would grab one of the rocks and I would just sit with it for a moment, right? I just breathe it in. And then I would figure out which direction was speaking to me. Was it the king, the lover, the warrior, the magician, right? Whatever part of our archetypal energies it was. And then I figured out what the prayer was that was giving to me. Whatever the thought was, whatever the indication was, right? What was the work I needed to do this week?
Yeah, thank you for adding that, because that's also part of the thing. Those of us that have been out there doing a variety of different addictive behaviors, we usually, I had 25 guys that went through Braveheart this last weekend. And awesome. We talked about this, half of them were substance users to the edge of the earth, almost died. Yeah. And could talk about the rituals that they used, but we try not to talk about it so we don't get triggered about it. But when we were using, we had very specific rituals that we became really good at. We are built for ritual. If we don't do it in a healthy way, we're going to find some unhealthy way to do it. So thanks for speaking to that. Exercise, mindfulness, and creating some kind of healthy rituals in our life are really important, no matter what program you're trying to pull together. All right, one more thing which is another good segue. We're just a well-oiled machine here, Bryant. So I know you and I are both recovering Catholics, and we both, I think I've heard you say something similar to me. Those rituals, they still have meaning to me. Of course, there's nobody that's caused more trouble in the history of the species than us Catholics. And also I've got a personal story about that. But and you and I both explored more contemporary versions of religion. I suppose you could call it religion, that are more focused on the spiritual experience than necessarily trying to hand over some set of guidelines about how you're supposed to find God, right? So I don't know, you want to talk a little bit about that stuff?
Sure.
Yeah. So let's give me your views on how this spirituality thing is emerging for you these days.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, I mean, in recovery especially, we already know that the 12 steps basically spun out of a Christian organization. I mean, the beauty of it is that it's about looking outside of ourselves, right? My best thinking got me here. So if I let somebody else kind of help me along with that, it's a whole lot better.
Yeah.
I grew up Catholic schools, heavily abused because I was different, odd, I was a toothpick, but I was very tall. Of course now it's great. I was the tallest out of my 60 people in the Catholic school. The tallest, was it Tall, Dark, and Handsome?
Yeah.
But I also stayed incredibly active too, and that's been a big part of it. But I found that I had to run away from the church in college, as many of us did, right? And as I had kids, I realized that there's some grounding, there's some good stuff that comes out of that, right? Just at least giving them some options as far as spirituality. And so I wasn't very tied to anyone being right. In fact, there was a saying I learned at a Unity church one time. I think it's a Taoist saying, which is all roads lead to God. The piece I added to it is pick one and do it well, right? Hell, you don't even have to pick one and do it badly. You just keep at it, right? Perseverance is a big part of it.
I particularly like the atheists. I've never met anybody more religious than atheists. They are sure about that shit. And they are they have chosen one.
Absolutely. Well, and that's actually got some interesting. There was my ex-father-in-law became an atheist. And the thing is he became a better person once he embraced it. He embraced the atheism, and he actually became a better person. The way I look at it is he found something he could believe in. Right?
Yeah.
And how much of our work is just about that simple fact? I found something I could believe in, I could trust.
Yeah, even a concept that's outside of me. If I follow it, it's better than trying to make up things in that little tiny 1% of knowing that you. Actually, I'm not proclaiming that atheism is the best path for somebody in recovery, but I know a couple of guys that have been sober for a long time, appear to be happy, and are boldly atheist. So
yeah,
I don't, and you and I don't have this figured out. Who knows how it's, anybody tries to start telling me who God is, it's like, okay, this guy's got it figured out, huh?
So there was a pastor at Journey Imperfect Faith Community in Austin, for instance, and he did a weekend, and I just got to talking to him and a couple of the guys from the church that had gone there, and I started talking to them, and I went to their services, and what was interesting is they call them Journey Imperfect Faith Community. First, nice. I like that approach, right?
Yeah, I like the name, and I have to. You throw things out there that some of our listeners won't know. Did a weekend. You and I know what that means, but there's this community, the Mankind Project, the New Warrior Training Adventure, the Woman Within, the Braveheart Experience. They're all very similar places where we go and do really deep psychodramatic, bioenergetic, transformational trauma work. That's the best way I can describe it short. So keep going. I want you to tell your story, but I wanted to make sure that I at least told our listeners what we meant.
Well, no, I appreciate that. And, here's the thing. As I do my recovery work and I start dealing with the various things that have gotten in my way, I started to finally figure out, and that's why I finally did a Mankind Project weekend, for instance, is I finally figured out that all I'm doing is adding tools to the toolbox. I'm doing something. I'm taking a step into something that is helping me because I cannot do it on my own, right? Yeah. At the end of the day. But one of the things I really loved, which actually helped me kind of re-embrace the spirituality aspect, was, Rick Don is the pastor there, and 55 years old and has a full head of colored hair still. I hate the guy. But anyway, but one of the things he said one time was, something God knows I barely believe in him. That moment of authenticity, and that moment of also vulnerability.
Yeah, that's
reminded me
how
important it is.
I can follow a guy like that. It doesn't have it all figured out. It's like Jung when they asked him, do you believe in God? And he's like, I don't think he went, but might have. But he answered it with, I know God.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing. Do you believe in God? Well, no. I think if I could get him to put his hand on his heart, but he would have and said, I know God. It's more of a thing that comes from the heart, right? Imperfect.
Absolutely. But it's the exact same thing, right? Why do I go to meetings? I go to meetings to be around hope, strength, and people who are doing the same work.
Yeah.
And guess what? That was another man in this case that I could add to that list that I knew I could be around, and it would help my recovery, not hurt my recovery.
Well, Bryant, I think you and I could have endless conversations about all these topics, and I don't know how much attention we would hold. But eventually, you remember playback theater. You did a little bit of me in the old days. We talked as a company that one of the hardest things to do is end. You have to learn how to be willing to end. And so that's what we're going to choose to sort of transition out here, and we'll get you back on the show again. In fact, I think you're going to interview me subsequently. So we're not done with you yet, but we're going to kind of transition out here. Why don't you say a little bit about how to reach out to you if someone wants to reach out to you for support as a coach or any of the things that you talked about today? How can people reach you, Bryant?
Sure. So I'm actually working with my wife. She has a private practice in Houston, Texas. It is called Authentic Healing and Counseling. EMDR, trauma, addictions work. I'm also doing neurofeedback. So I actually work with people in recovery and other areas doing neurofeedback coaching, but also in starting around September, I'll actually be doing therapy counseling as well. Cool. So that number is 281-501-0109. And that's the main line and all that good stuff. And I don't know what else you want me to tell you about that, but it's great. I've been looking forward to it, and we've been working on it for a while now. And actually, we're hoping to get back to Austin.
Yeah, and you'll be on our website at Deep Waters Recovery, and we'll backlink each other so people can follow.
Absolutely.
Get to all of your stuff there. So glad you were with us today, Bryant. Folks that are listening here, you're on Deep Waters Recovery Network. This is the Recovery Crew. We're on all of the podcast platforms. We're on all the social media platforms. The YouTube video, if you want to see this handsome dude, Bryant, over here, he just told us how handsome he is.
Unshaven.
But I don't know. It's like we're both sort of, we're a little old.
Yeah, but, a little scruffy today.
We're old and young at heart. But if you want to see the video version, you'll see that on our YouTube channel. I think it's Deep Waters channel. In a minute, I'm going to have Nicole say more about all that stuff. But actually, this is the minute. Nicole, are you still with us there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Nicole is the program manager at Deep Waters Recovery. Why don't you tell folks how they can connect with us?
Yeah, you can reach us at, our number is 512-677-7847. So if you have any questions about our programs, our intensive online Deep Waters program, if you have any comments, or if you want to be part of the podcast, please reach out. Our email is admin@deepwatersrecovery.com. That's admin@deepwatersrecovery.com. And like Bob said, visit our website. It's deepwatersrecovery.com. We post weekly blogs from our community. Our podcast comes out weekly, and follow us on all of the social media sites, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our YouTube channel is the Recovery Network. Oh man, now I don't know it.
Yeah, the Recovery Crew or Deep Waters YouTube channel. Yeah. All right.
You can edit that one back in.
Deep Waters Recovery.
Okay, Deep Waters.
Our YouTube channel is Deep Waters Recovery. So please subscribe and watch our YouTube channel.
All right. Thank you so much, Nicole. Nicole picks up all the stuff that's falling off the wagon behind this whole movement, and it was so glad you were all with us today. Glad you were here, Bryant, and come back and we put one of these things out every week. We're having a blast with it. Please subscribe to it, and Bryant, put it out to all of your giant community of folks who love you. All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks, folks, for being here. You're in the deep waters now.